I remember a year ago when this was happening, the UK sort of made a few diplomatic moves here and there, and there was a bit of domestic movement to try and clamp down on certain groups. A lot of more Hindu nationalists quite frustrated because they think that foreign countries are getting involved in Indian affairs. How do you think that plays into the more recent developments here?
You're going to see a lot of politically correct statements at best. Most countries don't want to touch this with the barge pole. The only people that have really poked their nose in are the Five Eye countries. Canada, New Zealand, Australia has kept quiet, I expect, and all these statements will be the same. They will not vouch for Canada. They will not vouch for the credibility of the credible allegations.
What, you thought that Canadians would get more? Because I think history has taught us that the Canadians are largely on their own about this. I mean, as I said already, the strategic and economic consequences of this long term for the West is, well, for the US.
This is The Global Gambit.
All right, everyone, it's that time again. It's Piotr here, and we're on The Global Gambit, a place where we look at the West's place in this ever-changing world. And we are going to be looking at, shall we say, a bit of a clash between the West, or a country that is in the West, we think, associated with the West, and a country that isn't, but an important partner, and that is the Canadian-Indian. I don't really know what even to call it, but I had someone in mind, and we're back with Abhijit Iyer Mitra, who is the senior fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, and has also got his master's degree in international relations from Monash University, and focuses a lot on limited wars and nuclear thresholds and things like that. So I'm very delighted to have him back on when we had quite an extensive set of conversations in the past. It's great to see you again. How are you doing?
Great to be here again, Piotr. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this is a fast-moving story, but I was keen to get your thoughts. So, I mean, we've got a mixture of people on the channel now, which we just passed 30,000, which is exciting. But for people who are not aware of what's going on, what the heck is happening between India and Canada right now?
Okay, so look, India-Canada ties have never been really good. And all of this starts with a sort of very targeted immigration of Sikhs into Canada. And there's a reason for it. Sikhs, Hindus who migrate, there are actually more Hindus in Canada than there are Sikhs. But the Sikhs form a very powerful vote bank, if you want to call it that. Because the situation of Sikhs in Canada has for a long time, since the 1980s, been the exact same as turn of the century and 19th century immigration of Italians and Irish to New York. There's that famous movie, The Gangs of New York, and there's lots of mafia movies, Godfather, amongst others, which talk about this phenomenon. Why? Because you have a socially clumsy country bumpkin from Punjab who rocks up in Canada, can't speak English. He can only go to community resources to find jobs. And the community, the Gurdwara, and the community leaders essentially weaponize him and turn him into an asset for furthering their political goals. They're very effective at it because they're either violent, and the RCMP, because of this religious relativism, sees all brown people fights as brown people fights. They're not really a Canadian law and order problem. They're a brown people problem kind of thing. It escalates, and in the 80s, you have the bombing of Air India 182 with the loss of 300 plus people on board, which took off from Canada. And the RCMP, according to the official version, the investigation was botched up. But it was botched up 3 times persistently over 3 different investigating teams. The CSIS, which is Canadian intelligence, went and deleted wiretaps. Now, Piotr, in this day and age, you can say you deleted wiretaps on your iPhone. But in those days, you physically had to take tapes, put them on the tape recorder, and wipe them. I don't know if the viewers are old enough to remember how tape recorders used to work. And they literally have to be played over 60, 90, 120 minutes, whatever the recording time was. And they have to be physically scrubbed. There are lots of actions in that process. There was a gentleman called Surjan Singh Gill, who turned out to be a CSIS operative, who was placed, who knew and was passing on details to the CSIS on the bombing. And he was removed just 2 days before the bombing to prevent him being implicated. He is somewhere in London now, which is where he disappears. He was put into some kind of a witness protection program, which we know in London. And since then, India has basically considered Canada guilty in a lot of terrorism that happens out here. This latest is a gentleman called Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who got killed a few years back in Canada. They still haven't caught anybody in that regard. And despite not having caught anybody in this regard in Canada, they've decided India did it. What's your proof? Nothing. They're blaming a gang called the Lawrence Bishnoi gang. Now, the very curious thing about the Lawrence Bishnoi gang is it's one of these Punjabi transnational gangs. They do drugs, they do murder, they do extortion, they do all kinds of things. Gun running, most notably. This is a gang that we have been telling the Canadians to crack down on. There's an intelligence dossier that's doing the rounds on WhatsApp right now, which is the actual dossier we gave them, of about 9 members of this gang that were wanted extradited for the last 7-8 years, which the Canadians have not extradited. There was a very famous Sikh singer called Sidhu Moosewala who got killed some 3-4 years back, just before COVID, I think, or after COVID, I think. I don't know. He got killed. And a member of this gang sitting in Canada called Goldie Brar admitted responsibility for it. The Canadian police still can't find him and certainly won't extradite him. None of the 9 members of the gang that were asked to be extradited have been extradited, even though the Canadian police know that they're members of the Lawrence Bishnoi gang. This is the same gang that they are blaming today for liaising with Indian intelligence to kill this guy, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And what is their proof of this liaising? That these guys were issued passports by the Indian government. And Indian schools gave them certificates. And Indian agencies gave them no objection certificates to rock up in Canada. Mind you, even when Indian agencies don't give them certificates, like was the case with Hardeep Singh Nijjar, he lied 3 times on his passport application. He had several criminal pending cases against him, and he was given Canadian citizenship. We don't know who overruled it from where. So it's been a very collective effort on the part of the Liberal Party of Canada, Trudeau's father, Jean Chrétien, in between, to import these elements out there because they provide them with a very powerful, Schutzstaffel kind of stormtroopers who go around doing the beating and criminal elements of the Liberal Party's vote gathering program in Canada. They intimidate voters. And of course, this will, and this is why Trudeau turns woke. In the first primary, when he came to power after defeating Stephen Harper, there were literally cases where Sikh Liberal Party members in the primaries would physically restrain and evict people who did not share their agenda. The RCMP would be standing outside, and their excuse for not acting on it was, oh, these are community matters. It's cultural relativism. We can't interfere in these things, you see. And that's how things have continued. So you'll excuse India for being completely incredulous about, first of all, there's no evidence. Let's be clear about that. There was a 5-hour meeting in Singapore where all that was given to our national security advisor was, oh, your diplomats are collecting information on people. Yeah, that's what diplomats are meant to do. Oh, your diplomats are going around telling people that if you continue with this line, we'll cancel your visa or you will cancel your overseas citizen of India card, which is basically a glorified permanent visa kind of thing. Well, that's exactly what they're meant to be doing. The 10% of that meeting that were dedicated to Nijjar, the only evidence they provided to connect Lawrence Bishnoi gang, who we have been telling them to take action against for the last 7-8 years, was that you issued them with passports. You've issued them with documents. We don't even know if those documents are verified because we know in the Canadian system you can forge documents, you can lie, you can have criminal outstanding cases of murder against you back in your home. You'll still be given Canadian citizenship. So, zero faith in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Belief that Canadian intelligence services have carried out terror attacks in India in the 1980s. and that it is a compromised cadre and a compromised core. Zero faith in Justin Trudeau, Jean Chrétien, or his father Pierre Trudeau. Zero evidence. Regurgitating evidence we've given against them to claim we're responsible for it. And all of this follows a pattern. You remember when Justin Trudeau got caught up in blackface, where he had blackfaced himself 3 times? Do you remember his apology for it, Piotr? It was, oh, I'm not responsible for it. I don't take responsibility for my actions. It was society that made me do it, because society in those days thought of blackfacing as being very funny. And this is the same thing here again. Canada has an internal law and order problem of their own making that they have imported, and they target criminal elements in India to import, and they're externalizing the problem and blaming us for it when it goes awry.
Yeah, I remember covering this almost exactly a year ago with a friend of mine, and it was the first video that went very popular on the channel. And one of the things that I learned from that was that one group called the Lion's Den, but they have a picture of a tiger, which is completely like, right, well, that's intelligent. That was like one of the best things. But like since then, because this has obviously been a long-standing feud with a heightened tension in the past year. So what have been the developments since, and why has it come to fray now that the Indians and the Canadians have both fired or rejected, repelled 6 diplomats each? Like what's the latest now in comparison in this long journey, and where do you see this sort of? We're not out of the tunnel yet, are we? The things are going to get worse before they get better, if at all.
They're going to get a lot worse.
Right,
they're going to get a lot worse because if Melanie Joly threatens sanctions against India, remember that works in India's favor. We have $56 billion of Canadian pension funds invested in India. All we really have to do is seize it to send their economy into a tailspin. All you have to do is cancel the overseas citizen of India cards that Canadians have. There are 400,000 Indian students in Canada who can be recalled and compensated from the Canadian pension funds that we seize. And what does that tell you for Canadian universities that suddenly lose 400,000 students overnight? There's a lot of damage we can do to Canada. But I think the interesting thing out here is how we've responded to America, which actually provided hard evidence, and how we're responding to Canada that's only given us, nothing burgers, really. And the allegations that Indian diplomats are collecting information and we issued passports. Oh my God, what a crime, what a heinous, horrible crime that was. And what's happened now is, you will notice, compare, because you're sitting in London, you will see how America reacted to the Litvinenko murder carried out by the FSB KGB allegedly in London, to how America and the UK are reacting to Canada right now. They're not urging India, they're not condemning India, they're saying the investigation is serious and we would prefer if India cooperated. So if Canada is looking to the Five Eyes for cooperation, it's getting absolutely none. It's not getting it from the UK. It's not getting it from America. I think the only really supportive statement that got put out was by the New Zealand foreign minister. But in that, he doesn't name India at all. It's as if aliens came and did whatever happened. It's a problem between Canada and, I don't know, the High Council of Mars, or the Elders of Venus.
And it's Zog.
I don't know. Yeah. So, Zog. That must be it. Or Emperor Ming.
No,
Ming
I think
the
that's
Merciless, if you remember the... So, the Americans are really trying to distance themselves from Canada as best as they can without letting down an ally in public. The British are doing the exact same thing. There is no appetite to take on India from those two countries. So imagine where Trudeau is stuck. No evidence, making a fool of himself. And notice he always makes these allegations exactly a week or a fortnight to a month before Canadian provincial elections. When this whole thing started up in September 2023, it was the Manitoba state elections. Right now, we're just 2 weeks away from elections in New Brunswick, in British Columbia, which is the big one, Saskatchewan, and another province, which I forget. Why is it that this only comes up when provincial elections are a fortnight away? I don't know. Why does it only come up when Justin Trudeau is in trouble for foreign interference, accepting Chinese bribes and Chinese influence? I don't know. Why is it happening exactly when Justin Trudeau is facing a coup from within his own party because they realize they're going to get wiped out in the next elections? I don't know. So it's one of those things that really, I think it's for Canadians to sit and introspect if they've voted for the right man-child this time.
On the, point about the US, I'm glad you brought up the Five Eyes, because when we had this conversation a year or so ago, I remember talking to my other guest, and sort of, from my perspective, the geopolitical significance of the Five Eyes, or specifically India as a partner in counterbalancing against China, it's never going to be overwhelmed by one singular country. Canada's an important partner in some ways, but it's not as important as India in the long-term geostrategic game, right? So where do you think the US will do anything else, or it's just going to sort of make these statements and then that's it? There's nothing else that the shall we say Anglo-speaking countries will do.
They'll have polite conversations on the side, away from the cameras, saying, "Guys, why don't you help Justin Trudeau out?" And we'll come back and say, "Well, look, here are these 8 people who want extradited. Where's the head for that? Here's the case of Canadian intelligence having actively colluded in a bombing, having had intelligence about it and not passed it on, having intelligence about it and not stopped it, having intelligence about it and having deliberately gone and deleted the wiretaps on that. You will have the dossiers given on the criminals we wanted extradited from the same gang who they are now accusing of colluding with Indian intelligence. And at that point, what can an American really say? The American diplomat knows when he's fighting a losing battle where, he's not going to embarrass himself for the sake of a man-child pyromaniac irrelevance who's at the end of his career, about to go in a few weeks. They're just not.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And the quote I was thinking of was from 2018. Trudeau said, "No, we're not mankind, we're people kind." And he's tried to sort of backtrack and say it was a joke, but then he ended up getting in trouble for being politically correct because he was actually mansplaining to a woman. So the guy, I've had enough of Trudeau, to be honest with you personally. But anyway, so where does this leave us in terms of Modi's government? Yeah. And what about Modi's government in terms of, because we do have a slightly different power situation in India? Are the Congress Party, which are more sort of, Western favorable, are going to be putting pressure on the Indian government to be the Modi government to be taking this slightly differently?
It's actually curious that you have that. It's curious you have that impression, because it's actually the Congress that's been viciously anti-West and decolonial and all that crap. And it's actually the BJP that has historically been pro-West. Of course, the West loves those who hate it. This is why you have, chickens for KFC kind of queers for Palestine and all that nonsense happening out there. Well, best of luck to the West. The Congress hasn't exactly been siding with Trudeau. They've just been trying to take pot shots at Modi. But the most surprising thing amongst all of this is the Communist Party of India. The CPI, which we actually call the Chinese Party of India, because the rumor is they get their orders from Xi Jinping every morning. The Chinese Party of India has condemned Canada, said, for the first time in their existence have they said that they stand by Modi and are united against Canada. We just expect to get sensitive briefings on the state of the relationship. So imagine if you've got the communists and a so-called right-wing nationalist, they are nationalists, but they're not right-wing, a so-called right-wing nationalist, or as they put it, a right-wing ultra-nationalist government, and the left-wing Communist Party of India together on the same platform. Justin Trudeau has done wonders for Modi's reputation in India. He's united us like never before. And probably he's that, sorry to use the word, but an external wanker that we needed to realize that we're one people, with one set of beliefs, constitutional beliefs, that is, leading a normal, peaceful life. And we don't really like Canada too much anymore.
I think one of the things that I found very entertaining is that it goes back to what you're saying about the allegation points. Like I saw one article or somewhere saying credible allegations. I mean, I don't really know what that is. Sort of, isn't that you have evidence or you have allegations, which is sort of...
you have allegations, and based on credible evidence, it becomes evidence. There is no such thing as a credible allegation. Right. But this is the kind of tomfoolery that they do. And because the Canadian press, the CBC, whatever, depends on the Globe and Mail, all of them, they depend on Trudeau for funding, which he's increased massively. They dare not take a line against him. Today, the CBC, well, last night, technically India time, the CBC called Gurpatwant Pannoon, who has put a target on every single Hindu Canadian's head in the past, who's called for the bombing of Air India airliners. He has been platformed on CBC last night. What does that tell you about the Canadian press?
Well, yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? Yeah. No, I mean, in the UK, it's not getting much coverage, but I feel that there's even a degree of mutedness as well from the British, obviously, on this. I mean, it's not really... I remember a year ago when this was happening, the UK sort of made a few diplomatic moves here and there, and there was a bit of domestic movement to try and clamp down on certain groups. But I think from... Western capitals, there's always been this concern amongst, human rights groups about the BJP and Modi's approach to the Muslim minorities and such. And I know that makes a lot of more Hindu nationalists quite frustrated because they think that foreign countries are getting involved in Indian affairs. And particularly when it comes, therefore, to things like the Khalistanis. How do you think that plays into the more recent developments here? Do you think that the countries from the diplomatic point are just going to keep out of it? Will you see more, independent groups trying to make sort of moves here? I'm just curious for these sorts of dynamics.
You're going to see a lot of politically correct statements at best. Most countries don't want to touch this with the barge pole. The only people that have really poked their nose in are the Five Eye countries. So Canada, New Zealand, Australia's kept quiet. I expect sometime today they'll also release a statement, and all these statements will be the same. They will not vouch for Canada. They will not vouch for the credibility of the credible allegations. Notice all three countries call it allegations. None of these three countries, not New Zealand, not UK, not America, call it evidence. And they'll say, you two guys need to sit down and sort it out amongst yourselves.
Okay, and then I guess,
that's not the kind of support I think Canada was expecting.
What, you thought the Canadians would get more? Because I think history has taught us that the Canadians are largely on their own about this. I mean, as I said already, the strategic and economic consequences of this long term for the West for the US specifically and Australia by extension, I guess, with the Quad, are too high to jeopardize those relations with New Delhi.
You remember the two Johns? You remember the case of the two Johns, the two Johns who got arrested by Canada after the Huawei heiress was arrested in Canada. Canadians got arrested by the Chinese and were held hostage in return for this thing. Well, what happens with that is that you saw the kind of support America gave Canada on that issue. You saw the kind of support America gave the UK on the Litvinenko killing and the chemical attack in Derbyshire, was it, or Leicestershire? I forget where. The so-called chemical attack thing that apparently Russia had carried out.
Oh, that was in Salisbury.
None of these countries... Salisbury, that's the one, yeah. Why is it that none of these countries are willing to give the same full-throated support to Canada? It's not because they're not living up to their Five Eyes obligation. It's because the Canadian case is extremely weak. They're actually doing Canada a favor by not coming out and calling Justin Trudeau a recalcitrant man-child to his face and saying you don't have a case. In private, they're very happy to say that, by the way.
Yeah, well, yeah, that speaks volumes. I think. I think it's also just leadership fatigue, right? He's been in power for the best part of a decade. It's time to move on. The Liberal Party, from what I understand, are just creating more hindrances and undermining the broader, I think, collective strategic interests than they are benefiting. I guess the last question really for you on this is the fallout. Obviously, this is expelling 6 diplomats is not good, but you can still that's a significant downgrade, but you can continue to sort of operate to an extent. Could you see that escalate even more? Could you see diplomatic relations completely severed for a period of time, depending upon how stubborn the Trudeau government wishes to be or unwilling to provide any evidence?
Absolutely, but we let them escalate because we're very clear here, we're the aggrieved party and Canada is the non-cooperative party. So remember, even the last time when certain Indian diplomats were asked to leave, we just asked them to downsize their diplomatic functioning here to maintain exact reciprocity of numbers and compounds. This time when they expelled 6 of our diplomats, we expelled 6 of their diplomats. The thing is, we've completely hollowed out the political section out here because it's the High Commissioner, the Deputy High Commissioner, all the heads of the political sections who've been kicked out. And it's very it's very difficult to run the political section without those people out there. Now, Melanie Joly in a press conference yesterday has said that there might be sanctions against India and Indian diplomats and so on and so forth. We welcome these sanctions. Just be ready for what we're going to do to you after that.
It comes as insane to me, like the Canadians or the government specifically are thinking that this is going to sort of end well for them. Do you have a sense of the people's perspective, the general populace? I mean, Canada's, it's not, I think most people think it's a dumpster fire. What about within India? Obviously, are there any camps that sort of support Canada on this? Or support, but see Khalistan more favourably or something?
Well, there's no seeing Canada more favourably out here. I think there'll be 1 or 2 fringe elements that would see it that way, but nobody in the main discourse at any rate has seen it that way. And what happens in that entire situation is when you've got 0 popular support for Canada and India, 0 self-doubt about it in any quarter that actually counts, ruling party or opposition, it becomes impossible for the Canadians to have any levers in India. At the same time, the very fact that most people in Canada are calling it a dustbin fire, except the kept media, the CBC and Toronto Sun and Globe and Mail and all those people, except for them, the general feeling is against Trudeau, which gives us a lot of levers to play with. We very successfully isolated Canada from America and the UK in terms of any real meaningful support. So, but I think we need to remember Justin Trudeau, Melanie Joly, and Bill Blair, they don't really care about that. They're only concerned about political survival. So they'll go deeper and deeper and deeper into a rat hole rather than admit defeat. I actually think they will escalate the situation because their political survival depends on it. Melanie Joly has no standing in the party without Trudeau. Bill Blair, I don't know if you saw the latest Canadian Parliament debate yesterday. It turns out he's almost semi-illiterate. He does not read any sensitive documents given to him. He has them summarized and read out by his interns. He has literally admitted that over the last 6 years, he has not read a single official government Canadian sensitive document.
Seems like
what do you do with clowns like these?
Well, Trudeau likes dressing up, so I guess he's just filling yet another role that he likes to do. Well, I mean, Abhijit, it's been a pleasure. I think, well, I guess the main takeaway I have in all of this is a country that is known for saying sorry. Well, the government at least is doing anything but that, and actually making steps to deal with the situation. But thank you for making sense of this for us and shedding light on it. I hope to have you back, maybe, I don't know, in the next few days or whenever coming days when this perhaps develops and we can reflect on it even more. And always your trip to Israel. Very interesting to have your conversation with you about, the relationship of India to Israel and the Palestinian border developments, because you were recently there, and I'd be very curious to hear about your experiences and perspectives on that. But thank you very much, Abhijit. Thank you everyone very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing, and we'll see you in the next one.